Hi, I'm Tristan, and this is Thinking About Politics. So today, we continue our examination of the politics of the Afghan government that was in place from 2001 to 2021, essentially the American-backed endeavor to build a state in Afghanistan. And thus far, we've focused largely on questions of what makes a nation in the first place, and how the 2004 Afghan Constitution envisioned Afghanistan. You know, what did the people creating that Constitution have in mind when they thought of the word Afghan? And in the end, we saw that this Constitution had some contradictions to it. Clearly, if you are a Muslim and a member of one of the enumerated tribes in the Constitution, and you're an Afghan citizen, you certainly match the mold set out in the Constitution. Although the Constitution does say it will tolerate other religions, it will not tolerate any religion that runs contrary to Islam. You know, you have a constitution that seems like it really wants to create a modern liberal democracy, a modern nation state. However, the document clearly installs an Islamic republic. Now, nothing wrong with being an Islamic republic. If that works for you, that's fine. It's just surprising since, you know, in the American media, that government has been talked about like it's a liberal democracy for like 20 years, and it's not. And again, no judgment here. I'm just saying it's weird that the American public was told so strongly one thing instead of, like, you know, I guess the facts are out there. I don't know. In any event, we're going to continue on today and actually look at the shape of the Afghan government itself. And if that sort of niche content sounds interesting to you, why don't you go ahead and give us a subscribe? That'd be mighty helpful. And, you know, if the spirit so moves you, give us a like and a share. That helps us too. So the first thing to note about the president are the big sort of ticket powers. First, they get two vice presidents, a first vice president and a second vice president. Second, he gets to appoint a number of government ministers as well. Now, a couple stipulations here. Remember we said before that this is an Islamic republic? Well, the president of this country has to be Muslim, right? Just like Christian conservatives want in this country the president to only be a Christian, the Afghan government got this in their constitution. Only a Muslim. You must be an Afghan citizen and must have Afghan parents. So that's what I call the no Obamas rule. Remember, President Obama had a father who was from Kenya, and a number of Americans didn't think that was legitimate due to very dubious grounds. Well, again, that's right in the Constitution here. If your parents are not from here, you can't be president of here. Interesting. So, and those criterion have to apply to the first and second vice presidents as well, because they might have to take over as president. So you've automatically narrowed the amount of people who can run for this office. But let's look at the ministers. To be a government minister, you do not have to be a Muslim. You can be a member of any faith in the country. A minister can be a National Assembly member. That's the legislature. We'll get to them next. But you don't have to be. It can be somebody from outside. You just have to be a citizen of Afghanistan. And you do have to take an oath in the name of God to protect Islam. So even if you're not Muslim, you got to protect Islam. So the president does some of the typical president-y stuff Americans would recognize, serves as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, appoints ministers with the endorsement of a House of Legislature, but he gets to do some other stuff too. The president of Afghanistan gets to declare war and peace. That's a big deal. Now, you might say in America we have that too, but we don't. Congress technically declares war and peace. No, our presidency's probably out of whack in that regard. Another important power is this president can call for a referendum from the people of Afghanistan, so long as the referendum is not contrary to the Constitution. So I want you to sort of, you know, the picture I'm taking away from this is a president with a lot more power than a president in the United States, or at least in theory. Those ministers who the president appoints, they make up what's called the government, covered in Chapter 4. So this government has a set of delineated duties, and some of them are kind of vague to me. There's this one: preserve the independence, defense, and territorial integrity, and safeguard the interests and prestige of Afghanistan in the international community. I don't know what that means. Maintain public law and order and eliminate every kind of administrative corruption. Does that have to be written down? Isn't that just kind of like, yeah, you eliminate corruption as a government official? Prepare the budget. Okay, I know what that is. So you have a president with a lot of power who gets to appoint ministers who also seem to have sort of very nebulous powers here. They implement the policy of the president, and the president decides this policy in conjunction with the National Assembly. And at several points when it's talking about the role of ministers, the Constitution goes out of its way to mention that if you've ever been convicted of crimes against humanity, you cannot be a minister. And if you're accused of crimes against humanity, the claim might get submitted to a special court. Are these warlords? Hey, Afghan Constitution. Are these government ministers? Are these the warlords who actually had control of Afghanistan at the time? It seems like you're giving warlords a fancy title. And also catch this last line here. During their tour of duty, the ministers shall not use their positions for linguistic, sectarian, tribal, religious, or partisan purposes. Okay. Why are you going to appoint people where that's a potential risk? Unless that's the point. Moving on. In Chapter 5, we get to the National Assembly. This is the highest legislative organ in the land, and it manifests the will of its people as well as represents the entire nation. It consists of two houses, kind of like in the United States. They have a House of Elders and a House of People. So the House of People is kind of like the House of Representatives. These are folks who are elected directly through elections in districts. There could be as many as 250 of them. You get the idea. Although the Constitution directs election laws to account for fair and general representation of all people in the country and proportionate to the population of every province. On average, at least 2 females shall be elected members of the House of People from each province. So, okay, interesting. Members of the House of Elders are kind of like the American Senate. Some of their members are appointed by provincial councils, sort of like how American senators were originally appointed by state legislatures. However, that's only a third of them. Another third are actually elected directly in district elections, but another third are appointed by the president for a 5-year term. Now catch this. Those appointed by provincial councils serve a 4-year term. Those elected in districts serve a 3-year term. There's another third of this assembly that's appointed by the president, and they serve for a 5-year term. And it says that these are to be from amongst experts and experienced personalities, including 2 members from amongst the impaired and handicapped, as well as 2 nomads. It goes on to state that the president shall appoint 50% of these individuals from amongst women. The individual selected as a member of the House of Elders shall lose membership to the related council, and another individual shall be appointed in accordance with the provisions of law. So that's a very interesting setup. This is the upper house of legislature, and 1/3 of that group gets appointed by the president. Remember what I said about the president being powerful before? He just got a lot more powerful now. Now, the National Assembly, that's the 2 houses combined, has a couple of delineated powers, like the ratification, modification, or abrogation of laws or legislative decrees, approval of social, cultural, economic, as well as technical development programs, approval of the budget. Well, a law is enacted when both houses of the National Assembly approve a law and the president endorses, unless the Constitution says otherwise. The president can veto, in which case it goes back to the House of the People, and the House of the People got to overturn that veto by a 2/3 majority. And this is probably fair since the president appoints 1/3 of the House of Elders. Send it to the House of the People seems like, yeah. All right, so we have a president, we got the executive, and we got this legislature made up of 2 houses with the top house split up into 3 buckets. But there's another legislative body we got to cover, and that is the Loya Jirga. The Loya Jirga, as I understand it, is a Pashto word for Grand Council. It has a historical sort of meaning where in the past it's been times where the nation needs to come together and make important decisions. Certain jirgas have been called, either with the Pashtun or as a nation. The Constitution itself, the 2004 Constitution, came into being, as the result of a Loya Jirga. So the Constitution is enshrining this historic body in the legal framework. It has a role in this government. It's formalized here. And it's sort of a super assembly. It consists of members of the National Assembly, plus the presidents of all the provincial as well as district assemblies. Government ministers and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, as well as the Attorneys General, shall participate, but they don't have voting rights. And it convenes to decide issues of, quote, independence, national sovereignty, territorial integrity, as well as supreme national interests. That could be a lot. To amend the Constitution, and to impeach the president. So for those second 2, in the United States, those are things that are handled by our Congress. Here, those options are taken out of the hands of the legislature and given to this super assembly. And, maybe that makes sense just because 1/3 of that House of Elders are going to be appointed by your president. They might be people less inclined to impeach. So you have this super assembly enshrined, and then given these two circumscribed, very specific duties. But then this larger sort of, and this might be just hearkening back to the historical role of the Jirga in, Afghan culture and history, the idea that there have been times where the nation has been beset by foreign invaders, at which time, the folks there call the Jirga and take their destiny into their own hands. This is an important part of the idea of what it is to be an Afghan being placed right into the Constitution. Pretty neat, I don't know. Finally, we get over to Chapter 7, the Judiciary. The real important things to note here is that the Judiciary purports to be independent. That's a big deal. Just like with the government ministers, there's no requirement that the justice is a Muslim. However, they have to take an oath in the name of God Most Gracious to protect the tenets of Islam. That Islamic Republic thing keeps boomeranging back. So, why does the state look this way? You need to understand that in 2004, after this Constitution was ratified, there was a reality on the ground. That reality was different centers of power in different localities were keeping order, or some semblance thereof, in Afghanistan and different areas. Local warlords, tribal leaders, this is where any real authority came from. So here's this government giving the president all sorts of power to appoint ministers, and the first thing that I think you probably are going to do as an Afghan president is you're going to appoint those people who actually have power as your ministers. You're going to go around and give them all government positions, and hopefully that's a way this government, which is just kind of an empty shell right now, right? You can take it and you can add the pieces, the actual people to it who actually have the power. And in fact, while I was editing this video, I finally went and looked up the Special Investigator Report for Afghan Reconstruction, September 2016. Starting in 2001, the U.S. military formed partnerships with Afghan warlords. Even though Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International had documented indiscriminate attacks on civilians, intentional targeting of civilians, murders, abductions, rapes, forced labors, and looting of homes being conducted by these warlords. In addition to human rights atrocities, the warlords were also involved in fundamentally corrupt behaviors. They had survived 20 years of conflict by engaging in drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and land grabbing, and illegal checkpoints, activities which they conducted with impunity in the absence of a recognized central government. As we said before, warlords began to acquire significant political power in the nascent Afghan state. When Hamid Karzai formed an interim government at the end of 2001, he appointed many regional warlords to senior positions in central government and subnational administrations. At least one scholar assessed that the first 32 provincial governors appointed in 2002, at least 20 were militia commanders, warlords, or strongmen. One drawback of that is you're kind of creating a nation of people, not laws, at that point. And it's all fine and good to say you're going to put those people in power to create a state and then use that power of the state to rein them in, but it's a much harder thing to accomplish. So we kind of have a high-level view of what the Afghan government looks like. We kind of have some sense of how this government is going to go about trying to create the idea of Afghan nationalism. In our next video, we want to look at that transition from this constitution to the first days of the government, and maybe go as far as the first election, depending on how long that video goes. Well, that's it for me. You've been great. I hope to see you again. Until next time,
I ain't got time
keep
to get
thinking.
you now. I'm busy with this mule.